His name evokes darkness, depth, and revelation. Fyodor Dostoevsky, the man who looked into the human soul and refused to look away. In this video, you'll learn how a boy from Moscow became one of the greatest novelists in history, how a near execution turned him into a philosopher of faith and suffering, and how he wrote stories that still feel like they were written yesterday. Why did he believe that freedom could destroy as easily as it could save? How did gambling ruin his life and then feed his art? And why do people across centuries still see themselves in his tormented heroes? This is a story about sin and redemption, about prison and rebirth, and about a writer who dragged the darkness of the human heart into the light. Drop your ideas for future videos in the comments and subscribe to the channel. Bedtime stories are posted here every day. Chapter 1. The Boy from Moscow. Early Years and Family. Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky was born in Moscow, Russia, on November 11, 1821. His father was a doctor in a hospital for impoverished patients, and the family lived in a small apartment on the hospital grounds. Fyodor saw sick individuals, destitute families, and people in pain every day as he grew up. These early pictures stuck with him for the rest of his life and constituted a large part of his work. Mikhail, his father, was a rigorous and serious man. He thought that hard labor, discipline, and order were important. He was also angry all the time and wanted his kids to do what he said all the time. Maria, his mother, was the opposite. She was sweet, polite, and full of faith. She read the Bible to her kids and sang them songs at night. Fyodor loved his mother very much and often remarked that she was the first person to show him what love was all about. Fyodor was the second of 7 kids. He was quiet, deep in thought, and loved to be alone himself. He liked reading books and pondering about life more than playing outside games. He learned to read when he was quite young, and he rapidly became interested in storytelling. He read everything he could get his hands on, from fairy tales and the Bible to works by renowned authors like Pushkin, Schiller, and Cervantes. He liked stories about people who were in pain but still had hope. Things weren't always tranquil at home. His father's temper led to a lot of fights, and the family was occasionally scared of him. Both parents still cared a lot about their children's schooling. They wanted their kids to go to school and have better lives. The Dostoevskys weren't wealthy, but they nevertheless bought books and took courses. He went to top schools and learned French, German, and literature. He wasn't the best student in every subject, but professors could tell how much he liked reading. When Fyodor was 16, something terrible happened. His mother was severely sick with TB, a lung disease that was lethal at the time. He couldn't do anything to help her get better, and shortly she died. He was heartbroken when she died. He later claimed that losing her was like losing light itself. 2 years later, something else dreadful happened. His father died in a strange way. A lot of people thought that the peasants who worked for him killed him because they were sick of how mean he was. The rumor stayed with Fyodor for the rest of his life, even though no one ever proved what truly happened. He often felt bad, like he had wanted his father to die when he was angry. Later on, this mix of love, remorse, and dread became one of the most important themes in his writings. Fyodor and his older brother Mikhail relocated to St. Petersburg, which was then the capital of Russia, when both of their parents died. St. Petersburg was a beautiful and sad city. It had palaces, theaters, and rich people, but it also had busy alleys full of beggars and drunk men. Fyodor once claimed that the city seemed like both a dream and a nightmare. He would later write many of his most renowned books here, including as Crime and Punishment and The Idiot. Fyodor joined the Military Engineering Academy in St. Petersburg. His dad didn't want him to be a writer. He wanted him to be an engineer or a doctor. He went that way because he had to. But he had a terrible time at the academy. He wasn't very strong in arithmetic or mechanics, and the rigid military schedule made him tired. Fyodor stayed in his modest dorm room, reading and writing, while his classmates drank, joked, and played games. He found comfort in books. He also started to have health problems during these years, like headaches, weakness, and indicators of the epilepsy that would accompany him for the rest of his life. He never stopped reading, though. He read the French novel Eugénie Grandet by Honoré de Balzac one day, and it transformed his life. He cried as he read the story, and then he realized he wanted to write stories that could make people feel that way too. He stated, "Writers like Balzac teach us how to suffer." After he graduated from the academy, he served as an engineer in the army for a brief time. But he never really wanted to do it. He realized that writing was his actual dream. He once quipped, "I might die poor, but I will die a writer." We can see how every facet of Dostoevsky's early life made him the man he would become. The hospital where he was born educated him about how people hurt and how to be kind. His father taught him how to be in charge, how to be afraid, and how to be bad with power. His mother taught him how to love, have faith, and forgive. The books he read made him think of new things. He learned a lot about loss and sadness after his parents died. And moving to St. Petersburg taught him that beauty and sadness can coexist. All of these things helped shape how he saw the world. He thought that life was not easy or fair. He saw that people may be kind and bad at the same time. He thought that love could rescue someone, but also that pride and greed might kill them. These thoughts eventually formed the main ideas in his books. Dostoevsky didn't have many pals when he was young. People thought he was unusual since he was bashful and serious. But he had a powerful inner world. He put a lot of thought into what it meant to be a person. He paid great attention to how other people talked, how they hurt, and how they lied to themselves. These things he saw provided the basis for his stories. He also had a close bond with his brother Mikhail. They were very close and shared their books, dreams, and worries. They would later collaborate together on writing projects and periodicals. His initial supporter and dearest buddy was Mikhail. Dostoevsky had already lost, been afraid of, and loved more than most people do in their whole lives by the time he turned 20. But he also had something special. He could transform sorrow into beauty. He wasn't simply composing fiction when he sat alone at night with a light. He was also attempting to figure out why people suffer and how they make sense of it. Those early years, which were both delicate and scary, informed everything he would write later. He had witnessed how fast delight might change into sadness. He had learned that everyone, even the poorest person had a story to share. He had also learned that the heart of a person, with all its paradoxes, is the most mysterious thing in the world. Fyodor Dostoevsky's adventure began here. He went from being a shy, sensitive youngster living in a hospital flat to becoming one of the finest writers the world has ever known. Chapter 2. From Lieutenant to Writer. The Road to Literature. Fyodor Dostoevsky became a young lieutenant in the Russian army when he graduated from the Military Engineering Academy. It sounded like a noble title, but it didn't mean anything to him. He had been studying for years, learning how to make maps and build bridges, but he didn't really want to do it. He was a dreamer in a world with a lot of restrictions. Fyodor was different from the other officers because he didn't care about uniforms, money, or parties. He cared about literature, thoughts, and the secret life of the soul. He worked in an office for engineers in the government, where he copied and checked technical paperwork. The task was dull and quiet. He sat behind a desk most days, with mounds of reports around him and his mind on other things. He started to write in the nights when the office lights went off and the city outside got cold and dark. That was when he felt like he was really living. He shared a small apartment in St. Petersburg with his brother Mikhail, where they shared food and hopes. They didn't have much money, but they had hope. Fyodor wrote by candlelight every night till late. He didn't write to get famous or make money. He wrote because he had to. He once observed, "If I stop writing, I stop living." He wrote his first novel, Poor Folk, when he was 24 years old in 1846. The narrative was about two lonely people who loved each other through letters, but were miserable and poor. The book was about kindness, dignity, and the tiny things that make people beautiful. The book's release shocked the literary community. People said Dostoevsky was the new Gogol, which is a comparison to one of Russia's most famous writers. Fyodor went from being an unknown army clerk to a famous author in one night. He tasted success for the first time. People wanted to meet him after reading about him in the news. Young writers would knock on his door to talk about politics and art. He was proud and excited, but also a little scared. Fame can be deadly, and it came too quickly for Dostoevsky. He quickly published his second book, The Double, which is about a man who meets another version of himself. It's a narrative of terror, madness, and identity. But readers didn't get it. People who didn't like it stated it was weird, hard to understand, and even unpleasant. He was very saddened by this rejection after the warm reception he had from Poor Folk. He started to lose faith in himself. Some friends turned their backs on him, and others laughed at him behind his back. He still wouldn't give up. He responded, "They don't get me now, but they will." There were a lot of fresh ideas in St. Petersburg during this period. Young people who were smart met in small groups to talk about politics and philosophy. They talked on how to make Russia a better place, socialism and equality. There was a lot of censorship, and most publications about freedom were not allowed, but that didn't stop people from reading them in private. Dostoevsky became a member of one of these organizations, which was led by a man named Mikhail Petrushevsky. Every Friday night, the members got together to read books that were against the law and talk about how to make the world a better place. They weren't violent or dangerous. They primarily just talked and shared ideas. But to the authorities, even words could be a threat. Dostoevsky became a member of one of these organizations, which was led by a man named Mikhail Petrushevsky. Every Friday night, the members got together to read books that were against the law and talk about how to make the world a better place. They weren't violent or dangerous, they primarily just talked and shared ideas. But to the authorities, even words could be a threat. Everything changed in 1849. The secret police found the group. In the middle of the night, Dostoevsky and a lot of other people were detained. Soldiers dragged him away, searched his house, and took his writing. They said he was planning to kill the Tsar, which is a crime that can get you killed. He was put in the Peter and Paul Fortress, a chilly, dark jail where time seemed to stand still. Weeks stretched into months, then days. He didn't sure if he would ever see the sun again. He wrote messages to his brother and prayed while he was there for 8 months. He later claimed that being in jail taught him how much even 1 minute of freedom might mean. Then, on a cold December morning, he and other detainees were carried outdoors to the courtyard. They were advised that their death sentences will immediately be carried out. The troops put them in groups of 3. Fyodor stood in the middle of them, facing the weapons. He thought he was going to die in a few minutes. At that moment, he understood everything, every sound, every color, and every breath of air. He later remarked that those last few seconds felt like a whole lifetime in a heartbeat. But immediately before the order to shoot was given, an officer rode into the plaza on horseback with a message. The Tsar himself sent it. The inmates were set free. The execution had been a brutal show aimed to shatter their spirits. Dostoevsky was not sentenced to death. Instead, he was banished to Siberia for 4 years of hard labor and then forced to serve in the military for several more years. But that moment, standing in front of death and then getting life back, changed him forever. They gave me my life back as a gift, and I have to prove that I deserve it, he added. The trip to Siberia was lengthy and freezing. He was shackled to other inmates and taken by wagon over thousands of kilometers. When he got to the Omsk prison camp, he saw true pain. Men coated in mud, sleeping on straw, and living on bread and water. They were a combination of killers, robbers, peasants, and soldiers. Dostoevsky met the impoverished and lost for the first time, not as a writer looking at them from a distance, but as one of them. Life in the camp was hard. There wasn't much food, there wasn't any privacy, and there was always punishment. The guards handled the captives like they were animals. Dostoevsky saw something surprising amid the toughest of conditions: humanity. He saw kindness in thieves, joy in sorrow, and faith in despair. He started to think that even the worst person had a little bit of good in them. He could only keep one book in prison, the New Testament. He read it over and over again, and it made him feel better. It taught him things, showed him the way, and was his companion. He was not the same man who had been caught years before when he left Siberia. He had stopped being so proud and learned to be humble. He had learned how to forgive and how to understand. After his punishment was over, he was transferred to a small town in Siberia to be a soldier. He met a widow named Maria Isayeva there, and she later became his first wife. He began writing again, slowly and gently, as if he were learning to walk again after getting hurt. His first book after incarceration, Notes from the House of the Dead, was about things he had witnessed in Siberia. It stunned readers not because of the violence, but because it was so honest. Someone had written about inmates as people, not monsters, for the first time. People were amazed. People who used to doubt him suddenly praised him as a new kind of writer who understood the soul. He learned what no school could teach him during his years as a lieutenant and his time in prison, that sorrow gives birth to the greatest truths in life. He went into Siberia as a proud young writer and came out as a guy who really understood the human heart. That was the start of Fyodor Dostoevsky's life as a writer and thinker that the world would never forget. Chapter 3: Chains, Faith, and Rebirth. Siberian Years. Fyodor Dostoevsky's life altered radically when he got to Siberia in 1850. He was no longer a writer, an officer, or a man with big plans. He was now a prisoner, one of many guys who wore shackles, slept on wooden planks, and lived behind cold, gray walls. Siberia wasn't just a spot on a map. It was a whole other universe. It took a long time and hurt to get there. He was shackled to other inmates and moved across the cold land for weeks. They hiked or traveled in wagons through snow and wind that never stopped. Some men perished on the road, while others lost hope. But Dostoevsky made it through. He paid close attention to everything: the expressions, the pain, and the small acts of compassion amongst guys who had nothing left. He would always remember those things. He was transferred to a prison in Omsk, which is one of the worst work camps in Russia. There were a lot of offenders in the small, crowded prison, including thieves, soldiers, peasants, and murderers. The air was full with smoke, perspiration, and sickness. It was quite cold in the winter and smelled bad in the summer. The men slept on wooden boards next to each other, with no cushions or mattresses. They ate black bread, cabbage soup, and drank water. There were no letters, literature, or communication with the outside world. Dostoevsky thought he had gone to hell at first. He was a nobleman among common criminals. A lot of detainees didn't believe him. They nicknamed him Gentleman and were rude to him. But Dostoevsky didn't say anything. He worked hard, carried big things, and didn't talk much. The other people started to accept him over time. He understood that the guys around him, even those who had killed or stolen, still had feelings, memories, and suffering. Like everyone else, they laughed, sobbed, and prayed. He will never see them the same way again after this. He thought that nasty people were just awful before he went to jail. He realized after prison that most individuals do awful things because they are in pain, not because they hate them. He later said, "There is a spark of God in every person." That idea became the most important part of his faith and the heart of his books. In prison, the only book you could read was the New Testament. Dostoevsky held it close to him, under his shirt. He read it every day, sometimes by the dim light of a little candle. The pages were worn over time, and he wrote little messages in the margins. He learned about Jesus' life, the message of forgiveness, and what mercy means. He remarked that the Bible saved him, not just his soul, but also his mind. Before going to prison, Dostoevsky said he was a child of doubt. He was more interested in science and philosophy than religion. But he found faith again while in prison. Faith was the only thing that was left when all else was gone. He realized that faith was more than simply a thought. It was a power that helped individuals get through the worst of pain. He witnessed people at their most basic level over those 4 years. He watched men fighting over bread, grieving without making a sound, and singing songs to recall home. He watched prisoners give their last bit of food to people who were weaker. He also noticed other people who had given up all hope and stopped talking and dreaming. Even though he was in pain too, Dostoevsky sought to comfort them. Later, he remarked that being in prison taught him what freedom really meant. He remarked, "To be free is not to have no chains, but to have faith and compassion even when you are chained." The guards were nasty, and punishment came rapidly. If someone broke the regulations, they may be beaten, whipped, or made to stand outside in the cold for hours. There was no privacy, not even for prayer. But Dostoevsky still prayed softly every night. He asked for forgiveness, patience, and the strength to deal with his pain. His thoughts about people started to change in this terrible environment. He stopped thinking of the world as good and evil and started thinking of it as a fight inside each person's heart. He thought that everyone has both good and bad things inside them. He would never forget the lesson, and it would shape the characters in all of his following books. His sentence ended in 1854, after 4 arduous years. He was sent to Semipalatinsk, a small village in Siberia, to be a soldier. He was still far from home and being watched by the authorities, even though the chains were gone. He lived in a little wooden house and was destitute and frail from years of torment. But something inside him had changed. Even if he wasn't free in bodily, he was free in spirit. Dostoevsky started to put his life back together in Semipalatinsk. He encountered new individuals, such as police officers, priests, and families in the area. Maria Dmitrievna Isayeva was one of them. She was a widow who was having a hard time taking care of her son. She was nice, caring, and sorrowful, just like the individuals Dostoevsky would later write about. He loved her and married her in the end. But things were still hard. He didn't have much money and wasn't very healthy. His hands shook because of prior injuries, and his seizures got worse. But he started writing again, slowly and gingerly, like someone who has been hurt and is learning to walk again. He wrote letters to his brother, in which he talked about how his views on faith, pain, and the meaning of life had changed. He also started writing a book on his time in prison. The name of it was Notes from the House of the Dead. It surprised readers when it finally came out a few years later. No one had ever written about prisoners in such a kind and compassionate way. People were used to hearing that criminals were bad people. Dostoevsky depicted them as people who were damaged, sinful, yet nonetheless able to love. People all around Russia cried when they read it. People who didn't like it said it was a new form of writing that was honest, painful, and very human. This time, it made Dostoevsky famous not as a young writer, but as a wise voice of truth. He had found his reason for living. He had lost practically everything during his time in Siberia: his freedom, his health, his companions, and his youth. But they also gave him something more: wisdom, love, and faith. He went to prison as a pompous, angry academic, and came out as a man who really understood what it was like to suffer. Dostoevsky later remarked that prison had given him a new life. He wrote, "If someone told me I could erase those years, I would say no. They showed me how to live." From then on, his works would be full of the same questions that had bothered him in Siberia. Why do individuals have to go through pain? Can feeling guilty help you get better? Can love save a guy who is broken? He learned the answers while he was in chains, but not through logic, but by anguish. He had become something much better than a man who wanted to write great books, a voice for everyone who has ever fallen and fought to get back up. Chapter 4: The Birth of the Novelist. Talk as Confession. Fyodor Dostoevsky came back to the world a different person after spending years in prison and exile. He wasn't the same young writer who had once dreamed of being famous and having deep conversations in St. Petersburg. He was now more spiritual, quieter, and smarter. He had been near to death, poverty, and human cruelty, and he had lived through it. He didn't want to impress people anymore. He wanted to understand them. He started writing with new enthusiasm when he was finally free to do so. His first big book after Siberia, Notes from the House of the Dead, made him renowned again. His honesty surprised readers, and his compassion moved them. He said that prisoners were not monsters, but men who were weak, guilty, and nonetheless able to be nice. A lot of people saw convicts as persons for the first time. Dostoevsky had opened a new door in Russian writing. But he didn't stop there. He learned a lot from the agony and lessons of his past. He didn't want to write about politics or society anymore. Instead, he wanted to write about the heart of a person, their fears, dreams, and hidden difficulties. He started to ask profound questions like, why do people hurt? What makes a person do something awful? Is it possible for someone to change? He would use these questions to write his best books. Dostoevsky had gone back to St. Petersburg by the 1860s. The city was different now. It was bigger, noisier, and full of fresh ideas. Russia itself was going through changes. There was talk about new freedoms, slavery was over, and young people were challenging old beliefs. But Dostoevsky was no longer interested in politics. He wanted to write about what people were thinking. He and his brother Mikhail launched a new magazine so that he could make money and communicate his thoughts. They put in a lot of effort by writing stories, articles, and book reviews. But tragedy struck again when Mikhail died abruptly, leaving Fyodor distraught and in debt. He almost stopped writing because the loss was so hard. But he needed money to live, and more crucially, he needed to write to get well. He then picked up his pen again. Around this time, Dostoevsky started to have trouble with another issue: gambling. He found casinos while he was in Europe. He felt he could beat the system at first. He thought he could win if he had enough willpower and smarts. But he quickly got stuck in a cycle of addiction. He lost money, borrowed money from acquaintances, and even sold his clothes. He told his wife in a letter, "I lost everything today, but I'll get it back tomorrow." He hardly ever did. These years were full of agony and confusion, but they also produced him some of his best novels. Crime and Punishment, 1866, came out of his need for money. It depicts the narrative of Raskolnikov, a penniless student who thinks he can kill an old woman for the greater good. But after he commits the crime, he is filled with shame and anxiety. Dostoevsky used Raskolnikov to show what occurs when someone tries to use intellect instead of morality, when they think they are above right and wrong. The book highlighted how a person's conscience may be a jail that is stronger than any cell. The book was a hit right away. The story scared readers because it felt so real. Dostoevsky produced a new kind of book, a psychological novel, where the major conflict happens in the character's mind. It seemed like a confession on every page. Dostoevsky kept writing about the human soul in his next books, The Gambler, The Idiot, and Demons, after Crime and Punishment. There were characters in each one who were divided between good and bad, faith and doubt, and reason and crazy. He didn't judge them, he heard them out. He let them talk, fight, and hurt. His stories were like therapy sessions where individuals talked about their problems and sought to figure them out. When people first opened his novels, they generally found extensive monologues and crazy feelings. But that's exactly what Dostoevsky wanted. He thought that talking was the only way to find the truth. He once observed, "Words can heal what silence hides." He kind of came up with the idea of talk as confession, which means that being honest about your grief could set you free. He also came up with a novel way to write. His books didn't feel like peaceful stories, they felt like storms. The characters talked over each other, yelled, prayed, and fought with each other. The pages were full of energy and intensity. People who read his work thought they were not simply reading a story. They were living in a person's spirit. Dostoevsky's health got worse during this time. His epilepsy came back, and it made him have terrible seizures. He felt weak and disturbed after each attack, but yet strangely calm. He once remarked that right before a seizure, he would sense a second of perfect harmony, as if he knew everything there was to know about life in that one moment. His work was full of these kinds of moments, when his characters suddenly felt both joy and anguish, faith and dread all at once. In 1867, Dostoevsky married Anna Grigoryevna Snitkina, his second wife. She was a young stenographer who helped him finish The Gambler on a tight deadline. She was his biggest support, taking care of his money, keeping creditors away from him, and giving him the security he needed to keep writing. He felt liked and understood for the first time in years. They traveled, wrote, and dreamed of a better life together. But life kept throwing things at him. His newborn children died prematurely, he was always in debt, and he often lived from one book payment to the next. He wrote anyway. It wasn't just a story in each new book, it was also a confession of his own anxieties and hopes. He used his characters to think about the same things he was thinking about. Dostoevsky became both the doctor and the patient through his writing. He investigated the sickness of the spirit and suffered from it. His books proved that people are not easy to understand. At the same moment, we can love and hate, believe and doubt, help and hurt others. Dostoevsky had become more than merely a writer by the time he was in his late 40s. He was now a moral philosopher and a psychologist before the word psychologist existed. His stories didn't provide readers simple solutions, but they did make them think a lot about themselves. People who read his books often said they felt seen, as if someone had gazed into their hearts and understood their deepest anxieties. He once said, "Being too aware is a disease." But he accepted the condition since it made him human and helped him write. Dostoevsky had made something amazing out of all his problems, like poverty, bereavement, disease, and guilt. A new sort of literature that spoke to the mind and the soul. People didn't just read his writings, they felt them. That was when the novelist was really born. He wasn't just a man who told stories, he was also a man who helped people hear the silent voice inside themselves. Chapter 5. Dreams, Doubles, and the Human Soul. Dostoevsky's life and work were full with significant difficulties, inquiries, and times when he looked deeply into himself. He didn't just want to compose stories, he wanted to know what the soul was all about. He thought of the human soul as a dark, complicated place, where good and evil, light and dark, and freedom and incarceration all lived together. In his novels, he wrote about this inner struggle, and the best example of this is how he wrote about dreams and doubles. A lot of Dostoevsky's characters have a split personality, or a double, which means they are divided between two halves of themselves. One side of the character wants to be nice, good, and loving, while the other side is selfish, mean, or humiliated. Dostoevsky used the idea of a double to emphasize that individuals are never just one thing. We are all full of contradictions. The Double, 1846, one of his most famous compositions, is all about this subject. The main character in the narrative is Yakov Petrovich Golyadkin, a government worker who is lonely and has trouble fitting in with other people. He feels weak, like no one cares about him, and unsure of himself. But one day, he runs upon a guy who looks just like him. At first, this doppelganger seems like a friend who knows how Golyadkin feels. But gradually, the duplicate takes over, stealing his work, his friends, and even his good name. As Golyadkin loses control of his own life, his universe falls apart. The Double depicts how the lines between who we are and the world around us may get fuzzy. It shows how we sometimes hide parts of ourselves or have trouble dealing with the worst portions of our personalities. Dostoevsky used this narrative to look at how fear and guilt may change how we see the world, making it hard to know who we truly are. Dostoevsky's characters, like Golyadkin, typically have conflicts inside themselves. They want one thing, yet do something else instead. This disagreement is what his writing is all about. He thought that people were never completely nice or completely bad. We are all a combination of both. His characters are continually trying to figure themselves out, deal with the parts of themselves that they don't want to see, and find a way to make sense of their inner conflicts. Dostoevsky knew a lot about this inner fight. For a long time, he had been fighting with his own concerns, doubts, and ideas. His time in jail, his money issues, and his health concerns all made him face his deepest thoughts about faith, life, and right and wrong. But even though his life was full of sadness, he was able to channel that anguish into something beautiful, art. He examined the human condition via the problems of his characters in a unique manner. Raskolnikov, the main character in Crime and Punishment, 1866, is another example of this inner conflict. Raskolnikov thinks he can kill an old woman and get away with it because he thinks he is a great man who is above the law. He first tells himself that what he's doing is for the greater good and that it would help society. But after the murder, he feels guilty, scared, and confused all the time. He becomes anxious and alone, unable to get away from what he did. Crime and Punishment is so compelling because it tells the reader what occurs when someone doesn't face their own inner conflicts. Raskolnikov won't face his guilt or his humanity because he thinks he can rise above them. But in the end, he has to face the reality about himself. No one can avoid the effects of what they do. His quest is a long, hard road to self-discovery and, in the end, redemption. Dostoevsky used Raskolnikov's narrative to highlight how guilt can destroy a person's soul. He thought that everyone has to deal with the darkness inside of them at some point in their life. But he also thought that the only way to find serenity was to face that darkness. Dostoevsky believed that the only way to be saved was to admit our guilt and learn from it. Dostoevsky's use of dreams to depict how his characters think and feel is another significant feature of his work. In his books, dreams aren't just random thoughts or illusions. They're ways to see into the unconscious mind. They show how the character genuinely feels, even if they don't fully comprehend it. In The Brothers Karamazov, 1880, one of Dostoevsky's best books, Ivan Karamazov has a dream that shows his most profound worries and doubts about God and the purpose of life. Ivan dreams of a child who gets punished for something they didn't do. Ivan feels sad and lost after the dream because he can't find an explanation for all the pain he sees in the world. This dream shows Ivan's inner fight between faith and doubt, which is a topic that plays through the whole book. Dostoevsky used dreams to highlight how humans often run away from the truth. In a dream, we can't run away from our own sentiments, and we have to deal with things we might not want to admit. This is why Dostoevsky writes about dreams. They show us the portions of our souls that we don't want to see. In The Brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky also looked into the topic of doubles through the figure of Dmitri Karamazov. Dmitri is a man full of passion and conflict, divided between his yearning for redemption and his desire for pleasure. Dmitri seems to be pulled in two separate directions all through the book. He is a sinner who wants to find God. His psychological conflict resembles that of other characters in Dostoevsky's works, a struggle between the soul's dark and bright aspects. This idea of doubles is crucial because it reveals how people are always at war with themselves. We may look like one thing on the outside, but on the inside we are full of things that don't make sense. Dostoevsky thought that this fight was what made us human. It's what gives us the power to do both good and bad things. But it's also what lets us change and get better. Dostoevsky's work ultimately demonstrates the complexity of the human psyche. We are not merely good or terrible, nice or mean, smart or stupid. We are a blend of all kinds of things. And it's this mix, this tension, that makes us human. His characters, with their hopes, anxieties, and inner conflicts, are like the problems we all have. We perceive ourselves better when we read them. Dostoevsky's examination of the human soul transcended mere academic endeavor. It was personal. He wrote because he shared the same problems, worries, and concerns as his characters. His books aren't just stories. They're confessions of times when he sought to figure out who he was and what was going on around him. Dostoevsky's characters' tribulations give voice to the deep, complicated, and sometimes terrible beauty of the human heart. Dostoevsky taught us how to comprehend, forgive, and, in the end, be saved by writing about the worst elements of ourselves. He thought that we could find serenity by facing our inner doubles. The notion that we are all capable of both good and bad, but nonetheless deserving of love, is what makes his writing last forever. Chapter 6. The Battle of Ideas. An Outsider Among Thinkers. Fyodor Dostoevsky was no longer only a writer by the 1860s. He was an important voice in Russian intellectual circles. But even though Dostoevsky became more well-known, the most famous philosophers of his time never fully accepted him. He felt like an outsider, often questioning what everyone else thought. He didn't just write stories. He used his books to talk about the most important issues in life, faith, and society. And this made people love and despise him. More and more smart people in Russia trusted in the power of reason, science, and progress. These thinkers, who were influenced by ideas from Western Europe, believed that logic and knowledge could help people overcome all of their difficulties. They thought that Russia should become more contemporary by adopting European methods of thinking, especially those about democracy and equality. A lot of these people thought that religion, especially Christianity, was old-fashioned and not needed. Dostoevsky, on the other hand, disagreed. He thought that people would lose their way if they didn't have faith and spirituality. The rise of rationality and materialism really bothered him. He believed that these concepts caused people to forget about their souls and the more profound, enigmatic aspects of humanity. Dostoevsky believed that one could not attain a good existence without a profound comprehension of the human heart, all its conflicts and suffering. This belief put him at odds with the younger intellectuals in Russia, many of whom were radical and didn't believe in God. They thought Dostoevsky was stuck in old-fashioned theological ideas that kept things from getting better. Dostoevsky was outraged at this, but instead of staying quiet, he fought back with his writing. He often wrote novels to explain that the world needed more than just reason and to argue with his adversaries. He said that society may quickly come apart if it didn't have spiritual depth. Dostoevsky's most important intellectual fight was with socialism and nihilism. More and more people in Russia were starting to believe these things throughout his reign. Socialism stood for workers' rights and equality. It said that the government should run the economy and provide everyone the same chances. Nihilism was a philosophy that held that all traditional ideas, such as religion, morality, and politics, were wrong. Nihilists thought that nothing had meaning and aimed to destroy all of the existing systems. Dostoevsky concurred with several critiques posited by socialists and nihilists on the prevailing system. However, he harbored profound apprehensions over the implications of their ideologies. He was afraid that if Russia accepted these ideas, it would kill the people's spirits. He thought that faith, love, and compassion were necessary for people to really make the world a better place. He thought that without these ideals, they would become cold and not care about each other. Demons, also called The Possessed, 1872, is one of his most important works from this time. It talks on the risks of nihilism and radicalism. The book is about a group of teenage revolutionaries who want to bring down the old Russian government. They have a lot of energy and ideas, but as they try to make their vision of change a reality, they start to lose their humanity. They don't make the world a better place. They make it more violent, treacherous, and chaotic. Dostoevsky warned in Demons that humans can lose their sense of right and wrong when they stop believing in anything bigger than themselves. His characters are motivated by aspirations, yet these beliefs quickly become harmful. They start using violence to try to make others see the world the way they do, but in the end, they become the thing they sought to eliminate. Dostoevsky warned Russia that if people follow extreme ideologies without grasping the necessity of faith and moral responsibility, they will ruin themselves. In Demons, he shows how an idea may be hazardous when it doesn't care about people. Dostoevsky's political views were controversial, but his spiritual views were just as extreme. He thought that religion was more than merely going to church or obeying regulations. It was about getting to know the innermost portions of the soul. He thought that Christ was the best example of what it meant to be human, since he suffered for others and showed compassion even when people hated him. Dostoevsky often talked about how important pain is. He didn't think that pain should be avoided. Instead, he thought that it was a way to get to meaningful understanding and connection with other people. He thought that the only way for someone to grow and be completely free was to face their pain. Dostoevsky's thoughts on faith were very different from the rising atheism in Russia at the time. In many of his books, he wrote about the fight between belief and skepticism. His characters weren't just good or bad. They were caught between believing in God and wanting to throw away what they had learned. Ivan Karamazov from the Brothers Karamazov, 1880, is the most well-known example of this. Ivan is an intellectual who doesn't believe in a God who lets good people suffer. His profound philosophical uncertainties precipitate a crisis of faith. Ivan asks his brother Alyosha, who stands for faith and love, why would God let children suffer? Dostoevsky looks at the problem of evil in the Brothers Karamazov, which is the question of why awful things happen to good people. Dostoevsky saw this subject as more than just an academic difficulty. It was a very personal issue for him. He thought that believing in a higher power was the only thing that could really give people hope while they were in pain. Ivan's doubts show how hard it is for many individuals to figure out what life and suffering entail. But Alyosha, his brother, responds him with love and forgiveness. This shows that even at the darkest times, there is hope if people choose to love each other. Dostoevsky didn't simply think love was a good idea. He thought it could alter the world. For him, love wasn't just a feeling. It was something to do. The characters that find redemption in his books are the ones who learn to love. This isn't easy. It requires sacrifice, forgiveness, and understanding. Dostoevsky understood that reason alone could not lead to genuine happiness amid the conflict between reason and faith. In The Idiot, 1869, he wrote about this. The main character, Prince Myshkin, is a pure and innocent guy who is stuck between a cruel world and a loving one. In a culture that prizes money, power, and position, the book exposes how love might seem silly. Dostoevsky, on the other hand, thought that love was the strongest force in the universe. Dostoevsky had a hard time balancing his great religious devotion with his own misgivings throughout his life. People often said he was too emotional, too spiritual, or too old-fashioned. But he never stopped trying. He thought that the heart, not cold reasoning or scientific facts, held the truth. It was the ability to love and forgive that held the truth. His fight with the intellectuals of his time was not simply about politics. It was also about illustrating that the human soul requires more than reason to live. Dostoevsky's works turned into a kind of spiritual fight. He utilized his books to ask hard questions and make his readers reflect about their own lives, beliefs, and values. He used his characters to ask, what does it mean to be truly human? What does it mean to be in pain? And how can we find forgiveness in a world that often appears broken? Dostoevsky was never fully recognized by the intelligentsia of his time, yet his views have had a lasting impact on the world. His books aren't simply about Russian society. They're also about the human soul. They will continue to communicate to anyone who wants to know what it is to be fully alive. Chapter 7. The Break with the World. Illness and Faith. Dostoevsky's life took another big turn in the late 1870s and early 1880s. He had already been through a lot of horrible times, like being poor, going to jail, being addicted to gambling, and losing people he loved. But now he had to deal with a new set of problems that would affect his health and how he saw the world. He had to deal with serious concerns about his faith and his place in the world because his health was getting worse. Dostoevsky's biggest health difficulty was that he had epilepsy. He had terrible seizures for most of his adult life. He often felt tired and weak after these seizures. He would sometimes pass out in public, and once he passed out for several hours. He felt weak, scared, and vulnerable because of this sickness. Dostoevsky chose to write about it instead of avoiding it. He actually used his experiences with epilepsy to make his characters more interesting. The character Prince Myshkin in his 1869 novel The Idiot also has epilepsy. Dostoevsky used Myshkin to look into the idea that suffering can help people become more human and learn about love, humility, and compassion. Dostoevsky's condition also affected him spiritually. It forced him to think about his own death and the meaning of life in a more direct way. His seizures made him feel closer to God in certain ways. He thought that going through pain would help him understand what other people were going through. He thought that this was not something to run away from or be scared of. It was something to accept, even if it hurt. He thought that the only way to really comprehend life was to go through pain and suffering. He thought that pain was the only way to learn about love, compassion, and forgiveness. Dostoevsky's health troubles were also a reminder of how fragile life is at the same time. His body was getting weaker, and he was getting more into debt. His money was in bad shape, and he was still having trouble making ends meet. He had lost a few babies while they were quite little, and the agony of those losses never went away. He had to depend on his writing for both money and meaning through all of this. But it wasn't easy to write back then. He was often on the verge of being broke, and the stress of having to finish his assignment on time was very high. During this time of personal difficulty, Dostoevsky's trust in God grew even more important to him. He started looking for solutions in religion, thinking that only by getting closer to God could he find serenity. He believed that the only way to understand his own pain was via God's love. He thought that faith wasn't only about following rules, it was also about grasping the deeper meaning of life and what it means to be human. In his book The Brothers Karamazov, 1880, Dostoevsky clearly shows that he believes suffering can bring people closer to God. The story is about three brothers named Dmitri, Ivan, and Alyosha Karamazov, and the problems they have with life, faith, and right and wrong. Each brother stands for a different part of being human. Dmitri is passionate and driven by desire. Ivan is smart but has trouble with uncertainty. Alyosha is nice and very faithful. The book talks on God, justice, love, and what it means to suffer. Many people think of Alyosha Karamazov as Dostoevsky's own spiritual ideal. Even when he is going through a lot of pain, Alyosha is a guy of strong faith who believes in the goodwill of people. Many times in the book, Alyosha's faith is put to the test, and he has to deal with uncertainty and despair, much like Dostoevsky did. But after a lot of hard work, Alyosha finally learns how important love and forgiveness are. He learns that the heart, not the mind, has the answers to life's biggest issues. It's the ability to love, forgive, and show compassion. Dostoevsky didn't merely write about love and forgiveness in his books. He really believed in them. He said in his personal writings that love was the only thing that could save people. He thought that without love, people would lose their sense of meaning and purpose. And the only way to know God and the meaning of life was to practice love and forgiveness. Dostoevsky's faith in love's strength was evident in his own life as well. Anna Grigorievna, his second wife, was a big help to him during his illness and money problems. She was always there to console and encourage her. Despite all the problems they faced, they made a life together in St. Petersburg. Anna helped him write, keep track of his money, and take care of his home. She was also quite religious, and her religion helped Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky began to feel a closer connection to Russia itself, in addition to his own beliefs. He thought that Russia had a unique position in the world that was connected to its spirituality and its relationship with God. He was very critical of Western European ideals, especially those of rationalism and materialism. He thought these views were harmful since they didn't take into account the spiritual side of life. Dostoevsky thought that Russia's future couldn't depend only on science and reason. He thought that Russia should go back to its spiritual roots instead. Dostoevsky was more than just a writer by the time he was in his 50s. He was also a kind of spiritual leader. People who were having trouble with faith, pain, and morality found help in his writings, especially the Brothers Karamazov. People connected with his work on a deep, personal level, and it appealed to individuals who were looking for purpose in a world full of doubt and confusion. Dostoevsky found serenity in his confidence in God, even though he was in a lot of pain. He learned the value of faith and love through his illness, his lack of money, and the loss of loved ones. He thought that the only way to be truly free was to accept hardship and learn from it instead of running away from it. He learned more about life by embracing the darkest portions of it. His faith in God and love became the basis for his later endeavors. Dostoevsky kept writing, even though his health was getting worse and worse. He didn't give up, even though he had to deal with a lot of problems. Writing became a method for him to think about his own religion, his own questions, and what life meant to him. He knew he didn't have much time left, but he was determined to accomplish the job he had started. He wrote his last book, The Brothers Karamazov, in a hurry, and it turned out to be his best work. Dostoevsky died in 1881, not long after finishing The Brothers Karamazov. He died at the age of 59, worn out after years of illness and personal problems. But his work lived on even after he died. People still read his books today because they go deep into the human psyche. His message of compassion, forgiveness, and the value of faith still speaks to us. It reminds us that there is always a chance for redemption, even in the darkest times. Dostoevsky's life was a long road of pain and spiritual growth. He never stopped looking for significance, even though he had to deal with a lot of problems. He learned that the solutions to life's biggest issues weren't in reasoning, but in love, faith, and the willingness to accept pain as a part of being human. Chapter 8: Exile and Final Years. Fyodor Dostoevsky was a well-known name in Russian literature by the 1880s, but his life was still full of problems and conflicts. He had already been through so much: jail, exile, the death of a loved one, illness, and money problems. He still wrote with passion, and some of his best pieces came out over these last few years. Dostoevsky lived in St. Petersburg in the early 1880s. The city had changed a lot since he was a child. There were new authorities in charge of the Russian Empire, and political and social forces were getting stronger. A lot of people wanted things to change and wanted a society that was more modern and democratic. But Dostoevsky, who had always been distrustful of political movements, was very worried about where Russia was going. He thought that the country needed to keep its spiritual foundations, and that Western concepts of rationality and materialism could never bring true pleasure. Dostoevsky's health had gotten worse by this point. He had been fighting epilepsy for a long time, and it was hurting his body. He also had chronic discomfort from several other health problems. Even though of this, he kept writing to help him understand his own pain and the changes that were happening in the world around him. His life outside of work had also changed. His second wife, Anna Grigorievna, whom he married in 1867, was his main source of support. She helped him write, ran the house, and kept him grounded when things were tough. Anna was not only his wife, but also his caretaker because they were so close. Dostoevsky's money problems didn't get better, and he often had to rely on the money he made from writing to get by. But even if he was having a hard time with his own life, his work continued to interest both readers and intellectuals. His books, especially The Brothers Karamazov, 1880, asked a lot of fundamental issues about life, faith, suffering, and what is good and bad. Many people think that The Brothers Karamazov is Dostoevsky's best work. The book is about the lives of three brothers, Dmitri, Ivan, and Alyosha Karamazov. It also talks about their relationships with each other and their father, Fyodor Pavlovich Karamazov. The story looks at moral responsibility, the reality of God, the dilemma of pain, and the fight for redemption. Dostoevsky uses the characters Dmitri, Ivan, and Alyosha to highlight how complicated human nature is, and how people may be both good and terrible at the same time. The subject of free will is one of the main ideas in the book. Dostoevsky posited that genuine freedom is attained not via evasion of pain, but through the deliberate choice to confront it with compassion and accountability. The character of Alyosha, who represents the road of faith and compassion, best expresses this philosophy. Alyosha has a hard time balancing his affection for others with his need to keep them from becoming hurt. In this way, the Brothers Karamazov is a reflection of Dostoevsky's own spiritual path, which was about finding a balance between faith and doubt, love and pain. Even though his health was getting worse, Dostoevsky worked hard on the Brothers Karamazov. He spent a lot of time dictating the book to Anna, who would then help him make changes and edits. During this time, Dostoevsky became more and more sure that the reason he was alive was to help people comprehend what suffering means. He thought that suffering could help individuals get to know God and what true love is all about. This subject is evident throughout his writing, but it is most strong in the Brothers Karamazov, where each character has to deal with his own problems and decide whether to accept or reject faith. Even if his work was successful, Dostoevsky had a lot of personal and financial problems in his last years. He was continually in debt, and people who owed him money were often knocking on his door. He sent a lot of letters in which he talked about how hard it was for him to deal with his health and money problems while also trying to finish his novels on time. He even made fun of his circumstances at times, but the tension really got to him. He felt like a man who was always running out of time because he was attempting to finish the work he thought was most essential before he died. Dostoevsky also had to deal with the developing political upheaval in Russia on top of these outside problems. During this time, radical groups were becoming more prominent, and many individuals were pushing for a revolution. Dostoevsky was worried about these political changes. He thought that Russia's future rested not in following Western concepts of revolution, but in going back to its spiritual foundations. He thought that the rise of atheism and materialism was bad for the country's soul, and he was quite worried about where Russia was going. Even though he was in a lot of suffering, both physically and emotionally, Dostoevsky kept writing until he died. He felt like he had to share his views and ideas with the world right now, thus he was in a hurry. He wrote a lot on life, faith, suffering, and the human soul. He thought these were the most important things to think about when trying to grasp the purpose of life. Dostoevsky's health kept getting worse, yet he found comfort in his faith. He became increasingly religious in his last years, thinking that his pain had brought him closer to God. He told his friends and family that his spiritual life was the best thing that ever happened to him, and that he often prayed for strength. Even when his body was deteriorating, his faith gave him the strength to keep writing. Dostoevsky died on January 28, 1881, when he was 59 years old. He died peacefully with his family by his side. His death ended a life full of pain, but it also ended a life full of great accomplishments and understanding of what it means to be human. Dostoevsky felt at peace in his last days because he knew that his work would continue to inspire others for years to come. His books would live on as proof of how much he believed in love, faith, and the fight for redemption. After Dostoevsky died, his work became much more well-known. People all throughout the world liked what he had to say about love, suffering, and faith. People still feel his impact on literature, psychology, and philosophy today. People still read and study Dostoevsky's books because they want to grasp how complicated the human spirit is. His work reminds us that love and faith can always bring us back to life, even in the darkest circumstances. Dostoevsky's life was full of suffering and trouble, but he never stopped writing or looking for the truth about what it is to be human. He discovered purpose in his pain and wrote to help others find purpose in theirs. His legacy as one of the best writers ever lives on, and his work makes people think about the most important concerns about life, faith, and the human soul. Chapter 9. Legacy. What Dostoevsky left the world. Fyodor Dostoevsky's influence on literature and philosophy persists today, over a century following his demise. People all across the world read his books, and his ideas still shape the work of writers, philosophers, and psychologists. What did Dostoevsky really leave us? What gives his writing such power and lasting value? Dostoevsky didn't merely compose stories. He looked into the deepest depths of the human psyche. His works are replete with concerns about faith, pain, life, morality, and the search for meaning. He didn't give his readers easy solutions. Instead, he made them think hard about who they are and what they believe. His protagonists typically have to choose between good and evil, reason and passion, faith and doubt. They highlight how complicated people are by showing that we can all be very nice and quite mean. One of the most important things about Dostoevsky's work is how he looked at the human situation. He thought that in order to really comprehend life, we had to face our pain. He didn't think of pain as something to avoid. Instead, he thought of it as something that may help us learn more about ourselves and other people. In his writings, characters who go through a lot of pain, like Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment or Ivan Karamazov in The Brothers Karamazov, typically change as people. Dostoevsky saw suffering as a way to grow spiritually, and his books encourage readers to think about their own problems and look for significance in hard times. Dostoevsky's characters, likewise, have trouble with the idea of freedom. What does it mean to be really free? In Notes from Underground, one of his most famous books, Dostoevsky spoke on how people often battle against their own freedom. He posited that individuals frequently struggle with genuine freedom, opting instead for a condition of self-doubt or even self-destruction. This theory was new and went against what people thought about human nature at the time. His writings still make people think about what freedom really is and what it means to be in charge of their own lives. Another key part of Dostoevsky's influence is how he looked at faith and religion. He was quite devout, yet he didn't write simple, straightforward answers about God and how to be saved. Even Karamazov, a character in The Brothers Karamazov, questions the idea of a loving God who lets innocent children suffer. Dostoevsky's own problems with religion are shown in Ivan's doubts. He knew that believing in God wasn't simple, and that having faith often meant asking questions and going through pain. Dostoevsky, on the other hand, nevertheless believed that love and compassion are at the heart of human existence, even though he had reservations. Dostoevsky believed that faith was not about obeying laws or rituals, but about feeling a strong bond with other people and with God. Dostoevsky's writing also looked at the conflict between reason and feeling. He thought that reason alone couldn't explain how complicated life is. In his books, characters like Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment, who rely too much on rationality, sometimes have problems with their own hearts. Dostoevsky contended that individuals require both rationality and emotion for a complete existence, asserting that genuine wisdom arises from comprehending the equilibrium between the two. People still read his work and reflect about the boundaries of intellectual thought and the emotional and spiritual sides of existence. Another key part of Dostoevsky's legacy is how he changed psychology. Many well-known psychologists, including as Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, were affected by his deep insight of the human mind and his study of inner struggle. Freud was especially intrigued in Dostoevsky's capacity to look into the unconscious mind and how hidden desires might affect how people act. Jung, conversely, was captivated by Dostoevsky's exploration of the darker aspects of human nature, those facets of ourselves that we frequently want to conceal or reject. Long before psychology was fully created, both Freud and Jung thought of Dostoevsky as a kind of psychologist. Dostoevsky's examination of the human psyche continues to influence contemporary psychology and has motivated innumerable therapists and mental health practitioners. Dostoevsky has also had a big impact on literature. People think he is one of the best novels ever, and his books have inspired many other writers. His ability to write about serious moral issues and create characters who are both good and bad has set him apart from many other writers. Many authors, such as Franz Kafka, Albert Camus, and Jean-Paul Sartre, were inspired by Dostoevsky's work on existential concerns and the search for meaning in a world that doesn't make sense. Dostoevsky had a big effect on Russian culture and society as well as on literature. His writing was closely tied to the political and social themes of his period, and he became a symbol of resistance against the Russian government's harsh forces. Dostoevsky's works spoke for the pain of everyday people and fought against the political and social order of his time, even if he had his own problems. People who fight for justice and freedom still find inspiration in his writing. Dostoevsky's influence can also be seen in movies and plays. Many of his books have been made into plays, movies, and TV series, and his style can be noticed in works from Shakespeare to recent movies like The Seventh Seal by Ingmar Bergman. People still enjoy Dostoevsky's books because of the complicated characters and moral questions they raise. His writings pose enduring inquiries regarding existence, mortality, affection, and salvation, queries that remain pertinent in contemporary society. Dostoevsky thought that we needed to look at the human soul honestly, without fear or denial, in order to really grasp it. He taught us that we can't escape the sadness and suffering of life, but that we may find meaning and hope by addressing it. His works continue to resonate with us as they reveal the truth of our identity and remind us that, even in our most desolate times, the potential for transformation, redemption, and love persists. Ultimately, Dostoevsky's legacy transcends his literary works and concepts. It is about how he made us think more profoundly about what it meant to be a person. He offered us the tools we needed to comprehend our own anxieties, uncertainties, and problems. He also reminded us that there is always a chance to discover hope and significance even when things are hard. Dostoevsky's life and work continue to motivate us to seek the truth about ourselves and our surroundings. As long as we keep asking the hard questions and looking for solutions deep inside ourselves, his legacy will carry on. Thanks for coming with me on this trip through Dostoevsky's life and work. As we end, remember that his greatest gift to us was the chance to ask hard questions and be brave enough to face the answers. We shouldn't be afraid of the harsh elements of life. Let's face our own problems and try to comprehend them, even if it hurts. We might learn what it really means to live and love through suffering, just like Dostoevsky's characters do. What will you do with what you learned from Dostoevsky's work? Will you keep asking questions, looking for answers, and searching for the deeper meaning in life? Let his works wake you up and remind you that the solutions to life's questions aren't always simple to find, but they are worth looking for. Don't take the easy way out. Find out the truth about yourself, the world, and the great mysteries of the human soul. The trip might not always be easy, but it will be worth it. Thanks for listening. Dostoevsky showed us that the journey to understand the human heart and soul never really ends.